All right, welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesh. We have a big show today, starting out with our friend Andrew Rigi will be here to talk about outdoor dining and where we're heading in New York City. Certainly there's some controversy there, but you'll definitely want to see what he has to say. Next up, we have an attorney who specializes in sexual abuse. That has to do with patients and doctors. It's an important topic that many times gets thrown to the side and it's hidden and many people are embarrassed, but you certainly want to hear what he has to say about it. It's an important show, so stay tuned. Today's verdict starts right now. All right, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesh. We have with us today a returning guest, a friend of the show, Andrew Rigi, the executive director of New York City Hospitality Alliance. Andrew, how are you doing today?
Doing very well. Nice to see you.
Listen, first and foremost, how's your summer been? Because we haven't seen you maybe since the spring. What have you been doing? Tell me what you've been up to.
Summer has been great. I got away with my family for a bit, got to go to Spain and Morocco and got to really go experience the food and spend time with different families and villages. It was a wonderful, wonderful cultural and culinary experience. And then I'm back in New York, on the grind, just fighting, advocating, and supporting our local restaurants and bars.
And speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about some outdoor dining. Let's refresh the viewers as to what outdoor dining was like pre-pandemic. Did we even have outdoor dining?
So before the pandemic, there were about 1,200 licensed sidewalk cafes in New York City. The vast majority of them were located south of 96th Street in Manhattan, and most of those were even concentrated probably south of 59th Street. There were very few in the other four boroughs or even in Upper Manhattan. And then when we say the pandemic struck and the city created this open restaurants, outdoor dining program to help save the industry, the number skyrocketed from about 1,200 licensed sidewalk cafes to about 13,000 restaurants across the five boroughs participating in outdoor dining with either a sidewalk cafe, the roadway streetery, or a combination of both.
What was the impetus? What was the reason that we created this niche that we now consider to be part of the New York City fabric, this outdoor dining?
Yeah, so before the pandemic, sidewalk cafes, one of the reasons there were so few of them compared to the number of total restaurants were there was a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy, and it was really expensive, particularly for smaller businesses to participate. And so many neighborhoods outside of Manhattan were actually zoned out of having outdoor dining. So even if they wanted to have a sidewalk cafe and they wanted to pay all the fees, go through all the bureaucracy, the city still said, no, you're restricted, no outdoor dining. COVID hit. And if we remember those early days, we had to be socially distant. We were essentially in lockdown. Businesses, restaurants went from about 320,000 employees, and it plummeted when the industry got shut down to about 90,000 people. People were losing their livelihoods. I mean, these are small neighborhood business owners. And we knew that if we were going to be shut down for indoor dining, at some point we were going to have to open for outdoor dining. So back in May of 2020, I co-authored an op-ed in Crain's New York Business Magazine with Speaker Corey Johnson at the time, calling on the de Blasio administration to allow restaurants to set up outdoors. About a month later, we were in Harlem with the president of our organization, Melba Wilson from Melba's Restaurant in Harlem, announcing the first day of outdoor dining that allowed restaurants to set up sidewalk cafes, but do something brand new called the streetery. Allowed them to use the roadway space in front of their business to set up outdoor dining. And that was the beginning of what we can get into a much more kind of detailed, complex history of how this program saved according to the city, about 100,000 jobs. And I know from speaking with restaurateurs, thousands and thousands of these small businesses from permanently shuttering. And it did something else that I don't think we always talk about. In addition to saving small businesses, remember, we're supposed to be socially distant, but restaurants where we come together to socialize. So it allowed New Yorkers to get together safely outdoors to enjoy a meal, enjoy a drink, and also bring some activity and vibrancy back to the city streets, which had been completely desolate if you go back and remember those days, other than basically, ambulances and sirens flying by. So it gave us, I think, hope. And I think it was symbolic that we will get through this. It's going to be tough, but I believe the restaurants helped, with outdoor dining, show that road to recovery.
What were the rules that had to be followed with respect to the outdoor eateries during the pandemic? Did they have to follow any rules? I think
Yeah.
that will take us as to what the rules are now and whether they've changed.
Yeah. I mean, this was one of the problems. If you go back to those days between the city and the state, the then Mayor de Blasio, then Governor Cuomo, everything was changing. I mean, I want to say almost daily, but it seemed like the pandemic era guidelines were changing sometimes like hourly of what you could do, what you couldn't do. When it came to the outdoor dining, it really wasn't always clear. What's the expression? Kind of build the plane as you're taking off. So that kind of happened. But essentially, you could use the frontage of your business to set up tables and chairs on the sidewalk. In the roadway, you had to set something up with barriers, obviously for safety reasons. It had to be infilled with dirt, soil, water barriers, and then you could kind of build around it. You could have tables, chairs, and then it evolved really as a means of survival. So you saw what was initially really outdoor dining when it got cold out, got, almost enclosed or semi-enclosed, but have some, kind of air circulation going through it. Then it got warm again, and then it became more outdoor dining. So we went through like multiple seasons with multiple different changes to the rules and regulations, what you could do, what you couldn't do. And it made it really tough for businesses. And in fairness, I think in some cases, while many businesses feel like they were overregulated, there was a lot of flexibility in many other cases for restaurants to do what they did because, listen, it was about survival. I mean, if we would have lost our restaurants and permanently lost these jobs, it would have been absolutely devastated and made the pandemic impacts even worse. So here we are 3+ years later, and I think the outdoor dining program, while it's absolutely essential, reflects the survival strength of the industry to evolve. A lot of these things were built with plywood back in 2020. They weren't weatherized. We didn't know it was going to be going on this long. So while some people have beautiful outdoor dining, other stuff needs to be torn down. And the new program, which we'll talk about, seeks a compromise, a negotiation, a balance to invest and standardize and make this outdoor dining program more sustainable, more inclusive for businesses across the 5 boroughs, communities across the 5 boroughs, but also address many of the concerns, not just from the restaurateur's perspective, but from the residents and everyone else who has a stake in the public realm or the public space where outdoor dining occurs.
How did the new program even come about? Were there complaints? Was it just an initiative taken on its own? How?
Well, yeah, I mean, you see from the millions and millions of people that have been dining outdoors in neighborhoods across the city, it's enormously popular. People love dining al fresco. Now, yes, people in different communities, especially where there's maybe a higher concentration of outdoor dining, have specific concerns, which we can get into. But as a whole, people love dining outdoors. It's great for the restaurants, more revenue, especially when many of these small businesses are still recovering from the impacts of the pandemic. It allows them to hire more people. It generates more revenue for the city and tax dollars to fund our essential services. And it also allowed, as I kind of referenced what I said earlier, thousands and thousands of restaurants across the 5 boroughs that could never have outdoor dining to finally have it. So there was a movement to say, okay, let's take this outdoor dining program. Let's not go to the past. Let's figure out what has worked, what hasn't worked, and formalize a permanent program that cuts the red tape, cuts the fees, allows more restaurants to participate, is more inclusive, and address some of the issues that we learned from real life experience during the pandemic and turn it into a permanent program for the long term.
Let's talk about a few of those issues. I live
Sure.
across the street from a restaurant that is outdoor dining. There are concerns that the co-op has about, mice and just garbage in general. Listen, you're literally on the street.
Mhm.
That has to be cleaned up. What are we doing about those particular types of complaints that people throughout the city are having? Just a nuisance complaint.
Yeah, well, when it comes to like debris and garbage or vermin, I'd say a couple of things. One, when it comes to the vermin, I have a young kid now. She's a little old, isn't in all the playgrounds, but throughout the pandemic, she was. Something happened, particularly during the pandemic, and vermin came out. There are more rats everywhere. This is not just a restaurant issue. You go to playgrounds, schoolyards, the subway, all these areas. So that's something the city has to get a grapple on. I know the Department of Sanitation is working on that. There's a new rule they implemented that's going to require containerization of trash instead of the bags just being left, on the sidewalks.
Yeah.
There are some actual concerns with that. We don't have to get into now. We can, but overall, hopefully that helps. We've been a big supporter of containerization of garbage, like cities around the globe have been doing for many, many years. So hopefully that does help. I think just more enforcement of regular rules. Again, the pandemic, things were crazy. They had at one time, DMV inspectors checking restaurants for their COVID compliance and everything. So I think as we emerge from the worst of the pandemic, the history of New York City shows us they've never had an issue over regulating and over fining small businesses. So I think through enforcement of a standardized program, they can do that. The other thing is, many of these structures in the roadway were built, like I said, with plywood. There weren't real high standards for what the barriers are, so they broke down. Debris would get underneath, vermin would get underneath. I think what they're going to do with the permanent standards is you're going to build the platforms in a way where debris and vermin are not getting underneath it, and it's accessible if they were to be able to clean.
So what are the rules in terms of when they have to be taken down, put back up?
Yep. So under the law that was just signed by Mayor Adams, sidewalk cafes will go back to what sidewalk cafes looked like before the pandemic. Tables, chairs, umbrellas, maybe an awning coming off the side of the building, perhaps like a little barrier or planters. The roadway, which is new, is going to go through what they call the rulemaking process that the Department of Transportation, the city agency responsible for managing the program, is going to put forth, and that's going to create the design guidelines. And it's actually going to have a public hearing process, so people can go and they can testify, submit their ideas after the city releases their proposal, which they haven't done yet. That's going to happen at some point in September. So I'd say people should look for that, and that'll be the standards of what the barriers need to be. I think they're going to have to be water filled instead of dirt. That'll be easier to fill them up, remove them. But the roadway dining, differing from the sidewalk cafes that can be year round. So if you want to eat at a sidewalk cafe in December, that's fine. Roadway dining is only going to be 8 months a year. So it needs to be removed in December, January, February, March. So basically April through November will be the roadway streeteries.
Does it look like restaurants, when they take it down, are going to be putting them back up during those 8 months, or are some of them just going to take them down permanently?
Yeah, so actually we have to be very clear because there's been a lot of confusion about this. When we said outdoor dining is being made permanent, it doesn't mean that the roadway structures that you see out there are being made permanent. Everything that's currently out there is going to have to come down. Maybe some of the stuff that's currently there could be modified to be approved under the new program. But if not all, the vast majority of everything that's there, particularly in the roadway, is going to have to be removed, and new outdoor dining that meets the new specifications and standards is going to be put up. It's going to be much more what I call outdoor dining. So think of a sidewalk cafe in the roadway streetery area, but that's secure with barriers and everything. It is not going to be these fully enclosed structures or sheds, as some people have called them, in the roadway. That's a real function of the pandemic. So it's outdoor dining. It's not what I'd say, indoor dining outdoors in the roadway.
All right, Andrew, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for the update, as usual. We'd love to get you back next couple of months, and just to discuss it, because this is an ongoing issue that so many people want to know about. So hopefully we'll see you soon.
Always happy to come back. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. All right, stay with us. Today's Verdict has so much more right after this.
Is it time yet? It's time.
Pasta and chocolate dinner.
Oh, terrific.
Pasta dinner.
Donating pet food is one of the many ways you can help families in your community. Pets and people belong together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
Hey, boss. Okay.
I said I'm fine.
Put me to bed, see you in the morning. With the frosted Superman, but it wasn't on it. And we lost it.
You can talk to me.
It's been really, really hard for me.
All right, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesh. We have a new guest joining us today, Anthony DiPietro from the DiPietro law firm. Anthony, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Hi, David.
Hi, so we're going to be discussing sexual abuse laws in New York City, always a timely topic. And maybe we could just start by giving the viewers a little bit of a refresher as to what are the sexual abuse laws in New York City, if you could.
Sure. So, I've been in this space, David, for the past 11 years. And over that course of time, my clients have taken the lead in passing 4 separate laws in the state of New York related specifically to sexual exploitation and abuse cases. So, for example, in Manhattan, right, we have the Gender Motivated Violence Act. That has been on the books since early 2000. At some point, it was on life support because judges weren't quite understanding what it meant. It's been modified recently, and in fact, there's a look-back window that's been created that now provides anyone who is a victim or survivor of gender-motivated violence with a look-back period, no matter how long ago the exploitation or the abuse happened. They now have a path to justice. They can file a civil case, and it can't be dismissed based on statute of limitations grounds. Similarly, in the state of New York, the Adult Survivors Act was passed. It went into effect last Thanksgiving. It'll remain open until this coming Thanksgiving, 2023. And any adult who was subjected to sexual exploitation and abuse in the state of New York, no matter how long ago it happened, they too can file a case, and it can't be dismissed based on statute of limitations grounds.
What would be an example of that type of lawsuit, an adult exploitation?
Sure. So look, the obvious one, right, is any form of rape.
Yeah.
Clearly, right? But beyond that, what we're seeing with these institutions, and specifically my niche, happens to be cases that involve physician-patient sexual exploitation and abuse. And, there's 2 things about those cases that are unique, and a lot of people don't quite understand. Number one, the exploitation that's committed by physicians is not obvious, right? If it was obvious, then it would happen once, and that would probably be it, because the patient would put an end to it immediately. But these physicians take all their knowledge, their training, their expertise, and they use it for evil. They use it in ways to exploit patients, and often the patients don't even know it. For example, if you look at what happened, with the Larry Nassar case with the gymnast.
Yeah.
Nassar was abusing a bunch of those girls while their parents were in the room. Okay, so these predators have figured out a way to normalize things that aren't normal. And so they pass off sexual exploitation and abuse as a form of medical care. And I'm grateful for everyone that's come forward, that's helping hold these predators accountable. And in particular, the second part is if you look at what's happened at Michigan State, Columbia University, New York Presbyterian, the institutions always know what these predators are doing. But instead of protecting patients, instead of reporting these predators to the state like they're required to do, instead they cover it up, they gaslight, and they lie to patients and expose more unsuspecting patients to further abuse.
What have we been doing as a society to protect those individuals? I mean, I know when we see it in the news all the time, but are they federal laws, state laws? Is it just common law? What are we doing? I know, I understand what we're doing with respect to the statute of limitations, but are we making it also easier to be able to prove a case against a physician or against the hospital that allowed the physician to do this, or the college who allowed, the trainer to do this?
Yeah, so I can tell you, historically, we have not done enough. We are at the very early stages of a long overdue cultural shift with regard to not just how sexual exploitation and abuse cases are treated, but with regard to how they're talked about. Historically, this was a very, uh, sensationalized topic. And I'm just grateful that the people that have been coming forward recently have figured out a way to sort of thread the needle, right? And talk about these cases in ways where they can't just be dismissed. I understand, as humans, a lot of people are judgmental. It's human nature, and if a survivor comes forward and if she's too emotional, she's dismissed because, she's just being weepy and too emotional. Or if she's angry, then she's dismissed as being militant. Recently we've seen people coming forward and talking about this in a way that they can't just be tuned out because of their tone, because of how they're talking about it. And I'm so grateful for that. We're in the very early stages of this right now, but I'm glad that cultural shift is happening finally.
Do juries seem to be sympathetic to this area of the law? And then I'll ask you the same question about judges. Do you find that, because these are usually jury trials, am I correct?
Yes.
Do you find that juries are more sympathetic than not to the victims, or is there something else sometimes that you see?
Well, so look, I always address this when I'm on trial, right? I don't go to court looking for sympathy. If I had to depend on sympathy to win a case, I probably wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. I'm there because the cases have merit. And I think what's important is that as advocates, as attorneys, as trial lawyers, we learn the language. We learn how to explain these concepts to people that might not understand it. Often when there's news about, a doctor assaulting a patient, the response is, oh, well, I would have kicked him in the face or thrown a chair at him and ran out. Well, the reality is no, people won't or wouldn't, because it's not obvious. Everything that's
It's only obvious later on when they leave the office, when they only realize it later on when they leave. It could be months or even years later do they realize what went on. Am I correct?
Sure. Well, let me give you an example. I think there are thousands of women in New York right now who don't know that they were sexually exploited by a predator OBGYN. And people are going to say, well, how's that possible? Well, I'm going to tell you. One of the things that he would do to women is they would come in, they would get a pap smear, and they'd come back for the results, and he'd be looking at a piece of paper and say, oh, wow, well, for your condition, you got to come back and see me every 2 or 3 months for a pap smear. And they're assuming, oh my God, do I have cancer? Do I have pre-cancer? This guy's so thorough, this is great. And they'd come back every 2 to 3 months for a pap smear for years. I have clients that have undergone 5, 6, 7 pap smears a year.
Wow.
What I've learned after getting their medical records is their condition that he's bringing them back for was simply that they were in their early 20s and were having normal pap smears. There was zero medical reason to do that. He just wanted access to their bodies.
Right.
But the patients don't know the standard of care. Right? And so they're just trying to be a good compliant patient and follow the doctor's orders.
Can I ask you a little bit about, and shift gears a little bit about the situation that's been on the news lately with the Blind Side and the particular gentleman who said there was a conservatorship that shouldn't have been, and it has to do with parental rights and termination of parental rights now. And what are your thoughts on that?
Can you tell me more about that, David? I'm not.
Yeah, there's a particular gentleman who, there was a movie called The Blind Side, and he wasn't adopted. There was a conservatorship that was created so that it would be easier for him to go to go to college. And then the parents used his permit without his permission. They created a book called The Blind Side and the movie with Sandra Bullock and made $300 million. And now he's complaining that he was never truly paid. He was exploited by these particular parents. Any comment on that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with that story at all.
No,
I
okay.
apologize.
Are you familiar with the termination of parental rights? I know there's been a new round of lawsuits that have been filed with the Adult Survivors Act, and one of them is the termination of parental rights. Have you seen that?
I haven't.
You haven't seen that, okay? Because that seems to be a big thing now. People are trying to become older than their age and terminate their parents' rights. And does that? I would just wonder if that affects their ability to be able to bring a lawsuit against a doctor or against somebody else. But
Yeah, it's a good question, especially because there's often different statute limitations for minors versus
right.
adults. But I haven't encountered that in my practice.
My last question to you is where do you think we're heading with respect to this area of the law? Do you think it's expanding? I know that, we can't ask for sympathy so much when we're trial attorneys. But do you find that more victims are coming forward and it's an area of the law that is growing?
Absolutely, more people are coming forward. And I don't know, especially in the area of doctor sexual exploitation and abuse cases, I don't know if it's because there's more of that now, right, than when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Or if it's because people are more open to talking about it. I don't know, but I am grateful for every person that has come forward. And that's, sexual exploitation and abuse thrives in dark and quiet places. And I am grateful for these clients who are willing to come forward and help us drag these things into the light and talk about it, right? Because that's how we gain power over it. That's how we win. That's how we change this culture for the benefit of our kids, grandkids, and generations to come.
Well, Anthony, we're going to leave it there. Great advice. And certainly we want to know where to reach out to you. Maybe you can give us a phone number or somewhere where we can get you if we need to.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me on. If anyone has questions, feel free to give me a call at 212-233-3600 or visit us at atdlaw.com.
Perfect. All right, Anthony, you take care. All right, stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more right after this.
Dear moms and dads, what you have achieved here today is going to help us and our futures. It is why we are coming up on stage to collect your diplomas.
You know it's true.
Mom, love you always.
Everything I do.
When you graduate, they graduate. Visit finishyourdiploma.org to find free and supportive adult education centers near you.
That's all for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If there is a topic that you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to email me at davidlesh@bronxnet.org. And remember, reach a verdict, know your issues. We'll see you in 2 weeks.